Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of Blue Leadership with your host, Dennis Nayor. Dennis is a 25-year law enforcement veteran and retired chief from the state of New York. He's also a proud graduate of the 240th session of the FBI National Academy and the 61st session of the FBI Lead a Command Institute. The Blue Leadership video podcast is brought to you by the nationally ranked Master of Science in Law Enforcement and Public Safety Leadership program at the University of San Diego. You can learn more about the LEPSL program at criminaljustice.sandiego.edu. And with that, I will kick things over to your host to introduce our featured guests. Thank you, everyone.
Kylie, thank you. And as always, great to be here. And today's guest is going to be Tom Chaplin, retired police chief from the city of Walnut Creek, California. Chief Chaplin has 31 years in law enforcement. He was with the city of Sacramento. He was with the Department of Justice for a while. He finished up at the city of Walnut Creek the last 7 years as a police chief. And that's really going to be the substance of what we're going to talk about today. A police chief, what that job entails, how one may attain that position, should that be the path they want, the role of education, a lot of other things that I think this is going to be a great podcast. So, Tom, thank you so much for being here.
Dennis, it really is my honor. I'm so proud to be affiliated with the LEPSL program. And I'm excited to be a part of this. I think the work you're doing is important. And, I've watched your prior podcasts, and it's just, it's exciting to be involved.
That's awesome. And yeah, we have great people that come on as guests. So the conversations pretty much run themselves. And, we talk about the LEPSL program. That's obviously the University of San Diego's Law Enforcement and Public Safety Leadership Master's Program. You and I are both alumni. We know exactly the value that we got from that program. Can you share your thoughts for the viewers and listeners as to what the importance and role of education is in law enforcement, especially for those who want to ascend the ranks?
I think this concept of lifetime learning is pivotal to being a great leader and being a student of leadership. I've told people for years, my advice to them has been, if you want to be a great leader, you have to be a great student of leadership. And there's many ways to do that. Whether it's a formal course like LEPSL, whether it's a program that exposes you to leaders from throughout the country, and really exploring contemporary issues, or if it's what you do when you're alone, what you choose to read, the articles you monitor, the mentors that you choose. I think it's very important from a professional and personal development standpoint, but you are also modeling those that aspire to be in a position that you are in. And, it's easy to talk about, we value education, and that's part of a leader's journey, but to model that, to embrace it, and to talk about new concepts, to talk about things that resonate with you, that might resonate with others, I think it's imperative as leaders. It's like anything you get skilled at, you have to work at. Some people are born with intuitive abilities to build rapport quickly. But others have to work at it. Even if you have intuitive skills and innate abilities, you should continue to hone those and continue to learn as you go in your career.
Yeah, and I think that, for law enforcement, you really have to have a growth-oriented mindset, because it is a profession that is changing daily. I mean, the laws are changing, the technologies are changing, the expectations are changing. I mean, you look at 2020 where everything, there was no playbook for, a global pandemic and managing a police response to all our calls, and then the civil unrest, and then the police reforms, and the reimagining, obviously, and then with that, the funding and how you're going to achieve your goals. So I completely agree that growth mindset is so important. And I used to say, and tell me if you thought the same, when I was in this LEPSL program as a chief, I felt there was a camera following me around, because everything we were covering were things that had such value and relevance to the contemporary issues that I was faced with.
Well, it's interesting. I've been instructing in the LEPSL program now, I think going on 2 years. And as an instructor, I learned so much from the students. And what's interesting is, you might plug into an issue that is really relevant at that moment on the East Coast, but maybe hasn't hit the West Coast in the same way. But it will. So that kind of collective learning and, sharing, especially sharing those times when you have been, done something well or did something that didn't work out, but allowing others to kind of learn at the same time. And that doesn't just stand for the kind of formal classroom setting, but that is for, your chiefs meetings, or when you get together with your own command team, or other, leaders in the industry to talk about, we've got this going on, and, we tried this, it didn't work. So now we're going to try something new, but kind of having that evolving and learning and developing style. And, Dennis, like you say, things change so much. If we looked at the problems when we got into this career, they're entirely different than those that we're facing today. We still have the same obligation to, reduce crime and to improve the quality of life and keep the streets of our, of our cities or counties safe. But the issues that we face today have grown exponentially. Social media and how we respond to crime that occurs through that, or like you said, 2020 hit, there was no playbook on how to deal with everything that was changing and how we lead through that so that our officers still feel valued and want to go out there and do an extremely difficult and dangerous job. So the only way that we can really cope, survive, and thrive in that environment is by learning from one another.
Yeah, and like you said, there's no sense in reinventing the wheel when there's someone else who has been confronted with the same issue or challenge. And if you can learn how they managed it and how they were able to address it, it can save tremendous amounts of time, effort, and energy. And then you look at, in 1829, when Sir Robert Peel put out his 9 Principles of Policing, they are all as true today, but how we achieve them becomes a challenge, like about we do our jobs through public approval, and the police are public, the public are the police. As true today as it was then, but how do we get there? And that goes back into building legitimacy and trust so that we can achieve that.
It's so true. In fact, as you talk about and kind of weave this into that lifetime learning, there's 2 books that I would refer, aspiring and current leaders to or recommend. And one of those is important to, I think, mention today, The Leadership Secrets of Colin Powell, especially with General Powell passing away yesterday. I would lend that book out with my notes in the margins because it gave tips on how to respond, how to treat people, how to be present. And those resonated with me and stayed as a resource. The other book that I have recommended to people is Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin, about President Lincoln and how he established his cabinet with people that didn't always agree with him, but also how he would respond to difficult times. And even something as simple as, if he was angry with somebody or disappointed, he might write them a letter, but then he would, put it in an envelope, put it in his drawer, and, think, okay, I'll check back in with that in a week. And if I'm still angry, I'll send that out. And, just a tip like that, especially at a time when we were dealing with, a lot of pressures and screws being tightened, it's probably not hard to fire off an angry email. But if you kind of take those principles, even if they are, 100 plus years old, and apply those today, the same stands true. The principles, the values are still resonate and still important. And Peel's principles are still important. It is just how we accomplish them using technology and with the circumstances that we confront right now.
Yeah. So, and with being a police chief, there's obviously, you and I can compare and contrast a little bit. East Coast for me, West Coast for you. I was in the role for 7 years in 2 different cities. You in 7 years in a very progressive, busy city that, was dealing with many issues daily. And what was the process for you or for someone now on the West Coast who wants to become a police chief? Where does it start? Do they take a test? Is it civil service based? Do they have to have a certain level of qualifications to meet the minimum requirements?
Certainly. So the process is basically, if you see a job that you're interested in, the first thing is, taking a close look at the application and the minimum qualifications. Some, agencies might want somebody that has been an executive or at least a second in command for a period of time. Some that might not be a requirement for. So once you find that your skill set matches what's required for that position, then you'll submit your application and your cover letter. And I do want to just say, when you're going for a position where precision and analysis matters, you might want to just do a quick proofread on those. There's no reason that your cover letter for an agency should have a different agency's, title in there or be for something else. And I have seen these mistakes occur. So it just kind of takes a bit from the candidate's credibility. So once you've applied for the job, the process I think is similar, whether it's internally driven, maybe put on by an HR department, or if it's a recruitment firm where there'll be a paper screening. So let's just say there's 50 applications received for the position. They will try to screen down to a more manageable 10 to 12 candidates, if not fewer. And then basically they're just weighing your qualifications and experience with what they're looking for. So once you've got through that paper screening, sometimes you'll have a discussion with the recruiter that will kind of start taking a look and a deeper dive into the values and skill set that you bring and that you are putting out there as a potential fit for the organization. And the recruiters are trying to match those with what they've learned from the agency regarding what they're looking for. So if you survive that paper screening, then you'll go into the process or assessment center, which generally will include a community panel, where everybody will have questions to ask. And then there'll be a professional panel, and it could be other outside chiefs, the sheriff, other executives. It could be city managers, to make sure you have the technical knowledge about leading a department. And as you and I know, Dennis, it's complex. It is not an easy job managing budgets, people, and the myriad responsibilities that come with that. So that piece is really weighing, kind of the science of the job and what and how you perform. And then sometimes there's an internal panel. It could be members of the executive team, labor groups, that type of thing. So once you've survived those, and then I've seen what happens at some agencies, you'll get to that top 3 or 4 candidates that'll be cut down in that round. And then there can be a community vetting. There could be a community interview that is sometimes broadcast on the local channels or via social media. So it's an opportunity for the community to see and hear from the candidate as well. And ultimately, the top 1, 2, or 3 might get sent to the city manager for that interview. And that's, at that point, you should have established that you've got the skill set for the position. And now when you get to the city manager, now it's about fit as well. And what I recommend to candidates is this is a significant decision for you and for the city manager. And you want to make sure you work for somebody that you respect. And you're going to be spending a lot of time with that person, and they're going to have a significant role in your life, personally and professionally. So you are also weighing fit for that agency as much as they're weighing fit for you. Then, of course, if you're the preferred candidate, you're selected, then you get to go through the whole background process, that you went through when you got the job in the first place. With one caveat, they're really looking now to ensure that you are who you say you are. If you walk in and say, I'm inclusive, I champion diversity, I want a transparent organization, and I'm accessible. Those things might be a real value for that agency. So when they do the background, they're going to make sure that you really have modeled those, and it's not just great things to say in an interview process.
Yeah, and nowadays, a background, part of it is a Google search, and everything for the lawsuits a person may have been named in during their career, or some of the incidents they've been involved in, and the praise, obviously, and the positive stories that have come out. But all of those items will come out, and it would behoove any candidate to be completely forthright and honest, because it'll be known, and the proof will show itself sooner than later if they aren't of the qualities and caliber that's needed. As I listened, everything you said was, even though it's from West Coast, so similar to East Coast. Here we have civil service tests, and interestingly, because the first city that I was the chief in, it was a smaller agency than the second city, so I had to retake the civil service test to become the chief in the second city, and I had to score within the top 3. And so that's a whole different nuance, that in addition to all those other things, the panels and the background and all the other screenings, that's just one other nuance, that if you have all the qualities but you don't score well enough in the civil service process, then you have to sit back and watch someone else take that role. So one more reason for getting that education, because it just makes you more critical in your thinking.
Well, certainly. And, it's interesting because we can kind of go back, harken back to the education piece often, because it makes you a better writer. It makes you better at analysis. And some of those things are very important. And, Dennis, what you said about, kind of this idea of a Google search, there's ways for people to get in trouble today that we just didn't have, 25 years ago. And that's part of, I think, our obligation as leaders, is to share with people the decisions that they make today, that post that they make today, that might feel good at the time or might be politically driven or motivated, could preclude you from getting the job that you've worked very hard for. So I've actually had discussions with people that aspire to be chiefs, and as you know, to be a chief or sheriff, it's about 1%, of the profession that gets in those roles. They're difficult jobs to get, so you don't want to make it more difficult for yourself by doing something foolish. By saying something foolish or by posting something foolish. So as leaders, we can tell people, listen, be very mindful that what you put out there exists forever. And is it this what you want to be judged on, 5 years from now, when that position you've worked so hard for, that's a possibility for you.
Right. And those exist in perpetuity. Someone may delete something they put up there, but a screenshot from someone and sending it off, it is there. And if it's inappropriate, they will have to answer for it. And like you said, that could preclude them from the job that they seek. And I think, going back to what you said at the beginning of the conversation about, from a leadership perspective, write that letter, and then put it in a drawer and think about it. And then most people will probably realize, if it feels good at the time, it's probably not something that they should be doing.
Right.
One of the things I wanted to touch on is, you talked about community panels. And I will double down and agree 100% that probably now more than ever, no police chief will get hired without support from a panel from the community, because now more than ever, policing is under such scrutiny that the key stakeholders will be part of a panel that will want to have a say in who the next leader of the police department is. So I'm glad you brought that up. And I don't think any quality agency will do a police search without having that.
Agreed. I think that's a vital step. And I think it's also important for people that might be watching this, wondering if, this is a role for them, or how high they want to go in the profession. And I recall, as a lieutenant at the Citrus Heights Police Department, I recall we had a commander process, and I put in for that. And, I talked to my wife at one point, and I said, I don't want my happiness to be tied up in a rank or title. I think if I retire as a police lieutenant, I will do so very proudly, just as I would have done if I retired as an officer. The profession is noble, and the way we get to impact people positively really does matter. So I did have, that kind of discussion as I went in and then started promoting, and then other opportunities opened. But what I've explained to people, and I've explained these to staffs that I've worked with and in departments that I've worked with, I make decisions based on the following, priority. Is the decision right for the community? That's the first decision. And it's interesting, how we grow in our careers. You're in your squad car and you're out to save the world, one call for service at a time, maybe one noise complaint at a time. And then you become that first line supervisor where you're still doing that, but now you're monitoring people and trying to help them be successful and safe. And then, you go up one more time, and now you're looking out a little further. And you're surveying what's going on in the industry a little more than you did before. But as you attain that second in command, third in command, or top spot, your decisions have to be community centric. We exist for the sole purpose of serving the communities. That means every decision starts there, and then it goes to the department and to the city or the county or the jurisdiction. They're generally not exclusive. That one's going to be bad for the other, but the community has to factor in everything. Every answer you give, every decision you make, whether it's how you staff, how you recruit, because the impact is there. So I agree. The community plays the role, and people should not have a concern with that. When you are going in front of the community or involved in a panel, you need to know that they have such a huge stake in who's running that organization, how it's going to be run, and those questions are fair, whatever the questions are. So you're right. It's pivotal.
And I think really also a chief now, they really have to think, just do a self-assessment as to their moral compass as well, because you will be met with so many competing interests and things that may not be in the best interest of the community or the department or public safety. And there may be obviously a self-serving end toward someone's desires. And as a police chief, you have to make the decision that you believe, like you just said, is in the best interest of the community, of public safety, the department as a whole, and the mission. And if it isn't, you have to be prepared to know that you'll deal with the politics of that. And I remember I had authored an article, and I was a chief at the time, and I understood this fully, that every chief really has to know what their line in the sand is, mm-hmm. because when they're met with something that they know is not in the interest of what they know to be right, they have to stand by that decision. And we know now, which is going to kind of lead into the next part of the conversation, is the politics of it. And I think chiefs really have to understand that as the chief, they will be one of the first to go if there's one, a problem, or two, the politics don't support their position any longer.
And I think in some jurisdictions, that's becoming even more and more prevalent with some of the things that you talked about when we started. Whether it's kind of reimagining, how policing's done, whether it is, cutting budgets or not doing things anymore. The first thing I think it's important when you're dealing with your political leaders, when you're dealing with your city or county team, but more importantly, in dealing with the community and your agency, is to really to share that they deserve to have a leader who is not afraid to make decisions that they're going to disagree with or not like. It is not a popularity contest, and you have to make decisions that are tough. But if you do them for the right reason, that are grounded in your values and a genuine sense of trying to do the right thing for people, then you let the cards fall where they may. I count one of the more important things that I did as chief was to create a community advisory board. It was called the Police Chief Community Advisory Board. And, It was made of 16 community members, and 77 applied. We interviewed all of them, and I wanted people that could be critics, but could also be open-minded, listen to one another, and understand as well. I might ask that you review a policy and provide me any blind spots or feedback. But at the end of the day, I have to make the decision on that policy, and you might not agree with it, but please know I've listened to your point of view. I understand where you're coming from, but I'm making a decision that's grounded in this. And, if that decision is a deal breaker, then that just is what it is. This is just that kind of job where, it is not, I don't think, right to always do what is politically expedient, but more importantly, to do what is right for the community, for the jurisdiction, the department, and your team.
Yeah, and I think that consistency is really where that lies, because people, their reputation will precede them and their prior acts, and people, like you said, they may not agree with the decision, but if they know it's formed in a place of fairness and in the interest of doing what's right, people will accept it more than if they think that a police chief is doing something because they have a personal interest in it or to spite somebody or something. And again, I think that's why it's so important for someone who is aspiring to be a police chief to start early, of just knowing that your track record from when you're an officer, first line supervisor, sergeant, lieutenant, captain, major, it will be uncovered. And if you have a track record of honesty and ethics and integrity, then that will definitely bode well for a new police chief. And what I wanted to ask you is your thoughts on as internal versus external. So you have a person who wants to be a police chief. I'd like to hear what your thoughts are of the pros and cons and the challenges of either way.
Thanks for that question. It's a great question because, I was an outside, police chief, and I went into an agency where I did not know a person. I didn't know a person in the entire city. And one of the things that I didn't understand was all of the confidence that you have gained from others, all of that trust and confidence that you've established over your career by making decisions for the right reason, by being ethical and honest and transparent with people. All of those things, you almost have to start from scratch and reestablish the trust, reestablish the confidence, and recognize that that's just not a given. And people might that know you, can probably attest to your character and your reputation. But when you're starting brand new, it is more difficult. It's lonely, candidly, because the position in itself is a lonely position. And then when you're surrounded by people that you don't really know and they don't really know you, and they're paying close attention to everything you do and that you say, I think it's important for that leader from the outside to be patient, to listen intently. And when you make changes or you make decisions, you do that in a way that honors those that came before and never kind of denigrates what that decision was. We decide things and we embark on different programs and methods by which we police or lead an agency that are right for that moment in time. But like we talked about earlier, things change and evolve, and the problems of today might be different or might need a different response. So it's being patient and making sure that you are giving people an opportunity to get to know you. But then, you have to invest in people early and often. You have to get to know people. And that is not only rewarding, but it is imperative, I think, as a leader. Now, coming from the outside, you can show up and, like I did, and say, listen, I'm going to evaluate. I'm going to meet with every member of the department, find out what's working, what's not working, what we should do, what we do that we shouldn't, just the myriad of questions. and then use those to kind of form where we were going to head together so that everybody's involved in that. But people are going to want to know the second you arrive, what's your vision? Where are we headed? Where are you taking us? And those are fair questions, and they come quickly. And so you have to be ready. You have to be consistent. And I would highly recommend that you under promise and over deliver. Because if you say you're going to do something and you don't, then you instantly lose credibility. Now, coming from the outside, you also have an opportunity to hit a reset button and say, everybody's got a fresh start with me. And one of the things that we do when we're at an agency for a while is we develop ideas about people. Maybe somebody wasn't at their best 10 years ago. And, maybe you got into an argument with them and now you're the police chief. And are you still kind of in the back of your mind remembering that time they argued with you? So it's, I think, easier coming from the outside to say, I have, everybody's got a fresh start with me. So I'm going to learn from you and you're going to learn about me kind of as we move forward together. Coming from the inside, it's a little different.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more with everything you just said, and I think it's really not, if you're coming from the outside or wherever, not to make change for the sake of change if it's not rooted in a necessity, and without getting to, if you don't take the time to get to know your officers and the department and its mission and what's being done well, there will be a natural resentment because there's people that most officers, the overwhelming majority, take tremendous pride in what they do. And if they feel that someone's coming in from the outside and says, well, they have a better way to do everything, it is not going to lend itself to that person being accepted very easily. And I think also, the challenge, and I want to hear the internal, and I was both. So I rose through the ranks and I was a chief in my first agency internally and then the second agency externally. And the challenge internally, though, is even the best chiefs in the country are all growing through their career. Mm-hmm. They all made the same rookie mistakes. They all, had their growing pains through all the ranks. And those who had been there with them know that. So they may be the chief, but to some of the maybe senior people, they still remember them as a rookie. So that's a challenge that a chief internally is going to have to overcome. And I'd like, if you agree or think different.
100%. And, one of the things I think, well, a couple things, it's human nature to focus on the negative. And if you're doing anything important in this world, you're going to get criticized. So, and then sometimes we don't offer a lot of grace, to each other for mistakes. And so you put those three things together and it becomes difficult to grow and develop and become better. And if you look at any position that you've ever been in, whether it's officer, or lieutenant or chief, whatever the title is, if you look at yourself on that first day and then you look, 3 years later, you say, okay, where am I now? You might think you're really good at 1 year. And then 3 years in, you're going, oh my God, okay, the smoke has cleared. I now know what I'm doing. And, you don't want to just tell everybody, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm brand new at this job. But what you want to do is ask people to understand that you're going to make mistakes and that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay for anybody to make mistakes. We might have an idea that we try, and at the end of the day, it might stink, and what should we do then? Hold it against the person for the rest of their career or let it go and, have the opportunity to move on.
Yeah. And I think, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Dennis.
I was going to say, and I think a part of that is really having that self-awareness to know what you don't know, or accept the fact that you don't know everything. You're going to change and grow. And if you do something that you were wrong, own it and tell people, because they already know it. But it's important, I think, that they realize that you as a chief understand it as well.
Agreed. I was kind of thinking, when you ask that question, that how difficult it is to shake off someone's jacket or, some baggage or something. If you were known as a young officer as having a lead foot, that you're driving too fast or you're driving recklessly, and then all of a sudden you find yourself as a chief and you're saying, listen, we are going to hold you accountable for how you drive. And people are going, well, hold on, Chief, I remember you used to, drive super fast. There's ways to overcome that by saying, I've learned, I've grown, and your lives are too valuable to us, to this community. And I don't want to look at your loved one and say why, you were a lead foot and we didn't correct it, because I should have, that should have been corrected with me, whatever. If you kind of can say, what's the process going to look like with you as a chief? The fact that people know you, but there's still some things that you're going to want to accomplish, that you're going to want to do, and that you're going to want to do with, the department. If you spell that out and you have those discussions and you're open and honest about it, I think there's a way to successfully land, because there's certainly a lot of successful internal chiefs. And, to me, that dream is somebody, starts as an explorer, works their way up through the academy and ultimately achieves that top spot. That's the dream right there. So there's a lot of value there, but it's really important. And you using the term self-awareness is so crucial to this, is having the self-awareness sometimes to remember when you're swimming in the same fishbowl for a long time, you sometimes lose sight that there's different ways to do things. And it's very important to kind of scan what's going on in the industry, what are best practices in other states, in other industries, and kind of bring those in. So it's having that kind of open mind and listening ear to take those new ideas and not be afraid to kind of reinvent yourself, or at least say how you're going to be different now as the chief.
Yeah, and there's so many pros and cons to each side, and you can have an internal candidate who presents all the same ideas, but then an external candidate comes in and they're more accepted because it's like, oh, they're from out of town. That, what do they say? The definition of an expert is someone who's out of town with a briefcase, and it's comical because it's sometimes people. From the reasons we just talked about, knowing the person with that familiarity, and then as opposed to someone who's external, who's not known, they may come in and have a bit more ease sometimes. And I also think that looking at now, I think though an external candidate really has to do their homework, because we talked about fit, and even if they have a high level of self-awareness, I think, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, I think an external candidate really has to know the community they're going to. Does it align with their style of policing and leadership, their values? Is the community, is it a bedroom community, or is it a community with high crime and a low budget and poor morale? I mean, these are all things that if a potential chief candidate doesn't do in terms of homework, if they're an external candidate, they may wake up and think, what did they do and why are they now in this agency?
Certainly. And, I think one of the fundamental questions somebody should ask themselves when they're looking at going to a community is, do I have something to offer? Can I make a positive difference and a positive impact on the department and the community? And will I be, happy here? And will they be happy with me? I think those things do have to fit. And, depending on the agencies you've worked with, depending on your own internal values and philosophies, you might have to assess if this is right and if this makes sense. And I think sometimes people get so enamored with having the title that they forget about the very difficult work to come, and that you have to be all in, and you at that point you're working for a lot of people, especially the community. So you want to make sure that you have something to offer them that is positive, that they have something to offer you, so that you're feeling rewarded and enriched for the experience. And it shouldn't just be that this is a place that will hire me. It should be, this is a place that works for them and for me.
Yeah, and I've always said if a police chief is doing their job correctly, they are working as much for the officers who, in their minds, think they're working for the chief or the administration. The chief should be working for every officer to give them the resources, the equipment, the support, so that they can go out there on the front lines and do the job that is such a challenging job today. And I think with being a police chief, I'll say honestly, there's much less glamour and glory than there is stress and sometimes heartburn, but it's a feeling of true satisfaction that I don't think anything else can compare to, when you know you're making a difference and you're creating public safety, and you're helping build career paths for your officers, and you're building respect within the community. It makes it all worth it. Those are the gold nuggets. And like you said, a chief has to get that straight in their own mind, so they know going in that's what it is, really.
Certainly, I think that there are some ways to phrase that, to remind yourself that every day, in every discussion. When you talk about your job, it is, you are working for those officers. You're working for the professional staff members. You're working for the community. You're working for the city. So you are really in that role where it is not about you, unless it's time to take the arrows. When it's bad and you need to be, that's when people should see you, and you've got to stand up and really represent the community at the most difficult times. But when it's about the great work going on in the streets, when it's about the great work happening by the boots on the ground out there, you have to find ways to take value in knowing, what, I hired that person, or got to promote that person, or this is part of a program we're doing, or you just take solace in the fact that somebody wearing the same badge and patches as you is representing the organization with dignity and with honor. And that could be, in a very difficult, high-risk situation, or it could be one of those moments of kindness, consideration, and human compassion, where our people go out of the way to help somebody, and it will never be heard of by anybody. It won't be on the news. It will just be something that we'll be able to go up to them and say, what, you made such a difference in that family or that person's life today. And the only way you can do that is by being present and by caring and providing exceptional and professional services. And those are the moments that you go, wow, I'm a temporary steward in this position. We're all going to move on. So it's the great work that we do and the great relationships that we make that we'll always have and always think back on it. And Dennis, you're right. You have to find those things that can bring you joy, but you also have to find ways to let people know that they're providing value, because they're not always hearing that.
Right. And I think there's for me, and I would bet anything that you would say the exact same. When you hear those positive stories of your officer, how awesome it was to always write that positive letter, make sure that they get a copy and it goes in their permanent record, and then to see them in person and to tell them, great job. That's worth more than a bonus in their paycheck to most people. And it just really means a lot, because really most people, they just want to be recognized for doing good work. And even though they're not seeking it, it's something in human nature that people feel good when people, especially the chief, notices it.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think, when we talk about accountability, I feel like it comes with this negative connotation, but it's not. We need to hold ourselves accountable to identifying good work, acknowledging good work, sharing that. Something that I, did at the last agency with my team was we did a glass enclosed bulletin board. So every letter that came in from the community, every commendation letter that we wrote would end up on that board, because that work does matter. And if we're going to, again, recognize that people always focus on the negative, we have to do our part to focus on the positive. And we have to hold ourselves and our teams for doing the same, because there is exceptional work occurring daily, if not hourly, at organizations and agencies throughout the country. And just by, making a phone call and saying, hey, I heard what you just did. My goodness, that goes a long way. I'll tell you just one, thing for leaders. I had forgotten that I had done this, but, I'd been involved in a promotion of a sergeant, and about a year into it, I sent the sergeant's parents a card. It said, from the desk of chief, and it said, hey, I just want to check in with you. It was a year ago that we were at the swearing in ceremony for, Sergeant so-and-so, and you would be so proud of the leadership in this department and in this community that has been provided, and the real care and concern for the people that are being led. So I just wanted to let you know this. So I would send things like that out. And candidly, I'd forgotten. But you never know, because, 3-4 years later, or you meet somebody and they'll say, that I still have that, or that's hanging on the refrigerator. Those things do matter. It matters to recognize the work that people are doing, especially because it is difficult. It's time away from the family. It is often above and beyond. And why wouldn't we just press pause and say, that was exceptional. We need to all celebrate you for a minute. And you're right. Some people might not like that, but that's okay. There's far more that do.
Yeah, and I think that actually the family of every officer is along for the ride, whether they like it or not, or they started off liking it. It is a profession that they're in, and I think for what you did as a chief to acknowledge that, I think means tremendous. And it's really, being a leader, a chief, or a leader in anything is really about people, and people always remember how you make them feel. They're not going to remember a policy necessarily, unless it was, such an extreme policy, but they'll remember how you treated them, how you were how they felt in your presence. And I think what you just described is something that every chief or aspiring chief should have in the back of their mind.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Dennis. And it is, we have to remember that the people that we're leading are the most important person in someone's life. People are moms, dads, husbands, wives, significant others. They're sending their loved ones out to work with us in a very dangerous environment where they have to make split-second decisions under very difficult circumstances. And we can't miss that family piece. It's easy to say, we have a family environment here, until it's not, and until people aren't acting in that way. So I think those are some things that aspiring leaders have to consider. And if there's areas there that they don't think they hit the mark in terms of kind of that warmth, and some people, warmth and that is not natural to them. They've got to find ways and techniques and skills so that they don't leave anybody behind. This is too important a part of the job.
Yeah, and with all, like you just said, and with the challenges, I think that any chief should really be focusing on what they're doing and how it may affect an officer's mental health and wellness. Because obviously within the 6 pillars of professional 21st century policing, people may be able to recite and memorize that officer wellness and safety is one of those pillars, but are they really taking that into account in how they run their department, the policies they craft, looking after an officer who was maybe involved in an officer-involved shooting or some other traumatic event? Are they doing those things? And I think that a chief coming in now more than ever has to realize what officers are being exposed to, and the scrutiny and the expectations is higher than it's ever been. And to think that officer wellness won't be affected, they'd be completely missing the mark. So I think a chief really, they may not be that warm and fuzzy chief, but if they're the type that cares, They just have to do everything knowing that what can they do to infuse health and wellness in and keep their officers healthy.
It's got to be demonstrable acts to take care of people. And, a couple decades ago, officer wellness was not part of our daily discussions. And that has changed. And it's important to have those discussions. I think if you walked into a room full of law enforcement professionals right now and asked people to raise their hands if they knew somebody that had committed suicide, or had not had a sustainable career because of the impacts that the profession had on them, you'd see probably everybody's hands going up. It is something that we have to talk about now. And think of the dramatic and important impact that talking about mental health and wellness has when you can stand as a leader in front of people and say, hey, I went through some very, a difficult thing or a critical incident, and this is what happened to me, and this is what I learned from it, and this is what I had to do to kind of either get over it or to live with it or recover from it. I think we have to, as leaders, have the courage to show weakness and vulnerability, because this age-old idea, this old school idea that something bad happens and we just, go and have a beer after work and talk about it, it's antiquated and it doesn't work. We have to talk about the toll that we experience and the things that we have seen that we will never in our lives unsee, and what that has meant. And candidly, for people looking to grow in their leadership and to achieve other ranks, it's super important that you take care of yourself at this level. I never knew I was going to lose sleep. As a young officer, I didn't know I was going to lose sleep in 20 years because I was concerned about a personnel decision I was going to have to make, or because I was so worried about a young officer because of something that she or he did in the field. And, what kind of ramifications is that going to have for their career? I just didn't know that was coming. So the pressures, the strain, and the stress that you experience, in trying to take care of others, really, it hurts, and it can affect you sometimes. So you have to find ways as a leader to recognize that and to find opportunities to take care of your own wellness, because it's easy to lose sight of that.
Right.
It could be as simple as calling somebody up and saying, man, I'm having to make this decision and I'm just really, really struggling with this, and just talking about it, or seeking other assistance. But you can't expect people to take advantage of all these resources, whether it's EAP or mindfulness training, if you are, not taking advantage of those yourselves and openly talking to people about the toll and the impacts that you've had.
Right. And that's why now the tenure for a police chief averages around 2 to 3 years. It used to be maybe 10 years back, maybe maybe 3 to 5 years. And then I think on its furthest extreme was maybe up to 7 years. But now it's 2 to 3 years. And from the outside, people will say, oh, that person was only in that role as a chief for 3 years, or they don't understand. I mean, it's just constant, the pressures and the crises you can't predict, the competing interests, the tough decisions. And now, we talk about, we want to praise our officers whenever we can, because there's millions and millions of positive contacts throughout our country, through the 800,000 sworn law enforcement officers in those 18,000 plus agencies. But those don't make the news. And the ones that do, if you're the police chief and you may have great policies and a great leadership style and higher quality officers, but if something happens now that has a level of questionability or is wrong, and even though it's not reflective of you or your agency, you own that. And any one of us can turn on the news right now and see a litany of examples. And I think that's something that a police chief needs to know when their time is up, where for their own health and wellness, they've led, they've served, and now it's time to pass the torch. And I think that's going to be individual for every person who sits in that role. And obviously the best way to do it is on their own terms.
Mhm.
But I think having, again, that self-awareness that they know, okay, they're not responding as well to the pressures, their patience is wearing thin, maybe their family life is suffering. I'd love to hear your thoughts, but I think that it's really important that they have set in their own mind when it's time, or they know when it's time to go, and they do.
You know, it's such an interesting position, because as much as we talk about, accolades and acknowledging good work for those that we work for, those boots on the ground and staff, as a chief, you can't expect that. Really, when somebody comes to check on you, that is almost a gift. And I've had that happen. I've had officers come in after a difficult call on the street just to say, hey, we just want to make sure you're okay. But, you make complex and difficult decisions every day, if not, numerous. And of those decisions, you're going to have some that are second guessed. And some people will hold on to decisions you make for a long time. And, it's interesting because you do the best you can while you're at it, and you try to maintain a high level of energy. But you have to recognize when you hit those moments where that energy is drained, and, where you've given what you can give, and it's time to move on. This was very tough for me to finally make that decision. And I would even start to think, well, geez, if I just hired, this person or promoted this person, don't I owe it to them to kind of be there for the first couple of years? And you start making these decisions that are just based on emotion, rather than really taking a look at, what do I have left to offer the organization, and is it time to go? And that idea of energy really hadn't occurred to me before, but I remember my wife asked me about that after about 5 years as a chief, and she said, have you ever thought about doing this at another agency? And I said, oh yeah. And part of it was because I had my style, and the kind of community centered policing is just something that I thought would fit anywhere. And she asked me a question that really gave me pause. And she said, would you have the energy to do this again? And when you think about the investment you're making in people, the investment you're making in the community, and the toll and time away from the family, those things do catch up to you. And, Dennis, how you put it, I recall that there was a moment in time where I thought, okay, I think I'm closing in on the date. But then the next thing, we receive a pandemic, and then we receive, myriad protest and social justice changes and everything else going on. And then you're like, well, how long into this do I need to stay to get us back to a place of stability? And, people would ask me sometimes, what's the most difficult part of being a police chief? And I would tell people it's making it look effortless. And it is not. But you want it to look effortless to anybody that's looking, so people can feel comfortable and they don't feel destabilized. Because if they see you suffering or having bad days, then that resonates through the department. But that's tough to do, and it's tough to keep up. So as a matter of self-preservation, there's a time where you just have to say, okay, I've given what I've got to give right now, and it's time to move on.
Yeah. And for me, my first agency, I had, as a team, we had all these things that we were going to accomplish, and we did. And it was such a zenith within the department. There was, we were fully accredited through the state, and we had new vehicles and new equipment, and the community loved us. And I was thinking, what better time to retire than, and I had 5 years as chief at that time on top, because it doesn't always work that way. But what I found, I missed it right away. It was just, because I still had a ton of energy. But the second time, after being a chief through the pandemic and the civil unrest and obviously the funding and all of the spikes in crime, and just basically it was relentless. And that pace, you don't set the pace, you just have to maintain. And that was a point where, to me, then it was an easier decision, because now it's time. And I agree, you can't sit in that role if you cannot give that same 110% effort every day. And that's, again, situational to what's going on at the times and the person and how many years they have in. But I think everyone has to know when it's time to call it a day.
One of the things that was helpful to me is I was on a marathon virtual city council meeting on a special day for my family, and let's just say it wasn't filled with fans of the police. And I kept getting texts from my adult children saying, "You need to retire. We're worried about you. This is too much." And that was when I realized that my family was worried about me. That was a moment. That was kind of that demarcation point where I go, okay, yeah, I need to start thinking about what's next. And it's healthy to do so. I used to joke with people that make these decisions, and I was always candid with people and saying, you need to make decisions out of a sense of loyalty to yourself and your family first, not to the agency. Obviously, when you're at the agency, you give everything that you can, and you try hard to leave a positive impact and legacy. But that agency is going to continue without you. So you do have to make a selfish decision. It's got to be about what's best for you and your family, even when it hurts to leave, because, I absolutely love the people that I got to work for. They're special. But I still have that. I get to admire now from afar and celebrate their successes and stay in touch to the extent that I can. But this is a time where you are going to move on. Every career has got its end date. And again, this idea of being a temporary steward is important. And you should never have your self-identity wrapped up in a title. And, I recall an officer one time accidentally called me Tom instead of Chief, and we're so apologetic. And I said, listen, I've been Tom a lot longer than I've been Chief, and I'll be Tom a lot longer. So that's quite okay. So yeah, you're right, Dennis. It's something you really got to think about and make the decision for you and for your family.
Yeah, and this is actually perfect how it segues into, because you're now faculty and you teach and you build the new generation of law enforcement leaders. And, they say the time to fix a leaking roof is not when it's raining. So well in advance of you making the decision to retire, you started thinking ahead. What am I going to do? We're circling right back to that education component. And if you can just speak to that, you're retired, I'm retired, but it doesn't mean we're sitting in rocking chairs. We're just switching gears. Can you just talk a little bit about, maybe as we wrap up, to how the listeners and viewers should start thinking about whatever it is, whether it's earning an undergraduate degree, their master's degree, or further, or how they should start thinking now, even if they want to still be a chief, but for when that time comes?
About 18 months before I retired, I developed a list of things I needed to get done while working, things I needed to start considering pre-retirement, just from the, how that works, what the process is, all that. And then the things I wanted to do next. And, I think it's important to have what that second chapter looks like and to start thinking about it. And, the interesting thing about retiring is you leave with a lot of wisdom. And we talked about when you first assume that chair or that title and you're learning as you're going, it's an opportunity for you to help people in their journey. And to be available as a resource, whether as a coach or a mentor or as an instructor. I facilitate the California Post executive development course. So it's an opportunity to be involved and to be present with these current and future leaders in law enforcement and share where are areas that I wish I had done differently or better, or what worked, or what were some of those self-preservation skills, and really thinking about what comes next, and preparing for the fact that you are, one day you're a member of this rather exclusive club with equipment, with access, and then one day you aren't. And you have to prepare for that mentally so that you're not shocked by it. And if you find yourself now only identifying with things related to your career, if you're only friends with people that are in the career, if you only do things that are related to the career, start considering what's next for you, whether that's, recreational and golf and fly fishing, whatever that might be, or it's traveling, or it's doing something entirely new. There was a time I considered I wouldn't mind going and getting a job at a bookstore, bringing together two of the things I love, reading and chatting with people. But be deliberate about that planning. Start considering what comes next, what you want to do, what's going to provide value, and what's going to give you an opportunity to still contribute to the industry and the people in it in the ways that you want to contribute. There's so much out there, so much on this other side. And I'm sure, Dennis, like as well, the phone still rings often. And there's still plenty of ways to stay engaged. And some days you find yourself so busy that you have to ask, didn't I retire? I thought there'd be more television watching. Or more just reading and hanging out. So you can be as busy as you want to, but start picturing yourself in that space so it's not a shock, and that you really enjoy this time that you work so hard for.
Yeah, and I think if people start acknowledging and again, I got this from reading it, and it was a book, and it was on elite military operators, and that it's like a speeding train. Like if you become a police chief, the day it's like just catching onto that speeding train, and whatever speed it's going, there's no time to catch up to the acceleration. You're going 100 miles an hour. And when it's time to leave, it's an immediate deceleration. But that time you're on it is just so fast because it's constant things that need being done and service. So I think the more a person thinks about it now and has that in their mind, it won't be such a shock. And like you said, there are so many things out there that law enforcement isn't the only thing that a person can do that's service oriented or that gives fulfillment. And it's just for each person to find that. 100%.
If I had any advice to somebody that was approaching that point in their career, I would just recommend that they give themselves some time before they go into another full-time job. And some people do that. They won't even take a day off. They'll last day will be on a Friday, and then Monday they're off on another, 9 to 5 or 8 to 5, or like these jobs could be 9 to 9. And the next thing they're just in that, and they never gave themselves the space just to decompress and to let that chapter close. And it does take a little bit. Where it finally hit me recently was, I went out to a soccer field with my wife, my daughter, and my daughter's boyfriend. We're just kicking the soccer ball around for an hour. And it occurred to me that I wasn't thinking about my phone at all. I wasn't thinking about a missed text, a missed phone call, a missed email on something that, occurred or something that I had to deal with. And it was almost liberating, where you go, wow, this is nice, because you don't even recognize that you need to decompress. So I would just, recommend that people consider, if you're going to jump into something new, it's okay to take a little time for yourself, reset, recharge, decompress, and refocus. And that helps. It helps to restore your energy.
And as we close with our final, when we say like our main takeaways, tell me what I'm missing here. People going into it, they have to know it's not just that, with that acronym, plan, organize, direct, coordinate, report, budget. You can read that in the book, but being a police chief is so much more than that. And that it's about people. It's about service. It's about, doing what you can for the community and the department that's not in anybody's interest other than the greater good. And knowing that, you'll make mistakes, learn from them, admit them, and when it's time to go, prepare in advance. And the Lepsel program, I think we would be remiss if we didn't give a plug for this, because to me, there's so many doors that are open to you and I. If we chose right now, we wanted to do something in the field that's not active law enforcement, because of that education component. And I think, again, laying that groundwork in advance will be huge.
I think that sums it up. Dennis, I would just remind people that, as a leader, you are working to get good work done through others. And to do that, you have to be authentic. You have to be genuine. You're going to make tough decisions that people might not agree with, but you should always be prepared to own those decisions, explain why you made it, and move forward. And finally, the only other thing I'll add is that I think that people want two things from their leader. One, they want them to be smart, to handle all those things you talked about, whether it's budget and it's strategy and it's hiring and it's all the complexities that come with the science of the job. So they want their leaders to be smart, but they also want leaders that care about them, care about their success, care about their well-being, and demonstrate that daily. And I think that will help people really be successful in leadership roles.
I can think of no better place to close this podcast. I know Kylie's going to come back in, and to me, this is actually the longest podcast we've done so far in the series, but every minute to me has been well worth it. And Tom, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, insights, and the experiences to the listeners and viewers.
Again, just a pleasure and really my honor to participate. Thanks for the work you're doing. It's just so important to talk with each other, to learn from each other, and to take advantage of these tools. So thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Kylie.
Yeah, thank you both so much for your time today. And thank you, viewers, for tuning in. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to meet the law enforcement heroes and leaders who are part of the MS Lepsel family. If you'd like to watch previous episodes of Blue Leadership, you can find them on the video tab of our Facebook page or by searching USD Blue Leadership on YouTube. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you all next time.